I am Sean, another Rimshots with Sean, brought to you by Barstools and Bandtalk. Jordan Bonaparte we have a mutual friend in Ryan Boudreau, who I play in a couple of bands with, and Jordan knows him. So this story, I mean, I read this book, incredible. When all this was coming out, Paul was he'd be writing or he'd be on the Rick Howe show, and he'd say some stuff, and it'd be like, people will call in, this guy's a lunatic. This guy doesn't know. And 3 weeks later, everything that he said started falling into place.
Funny how that works, right?
I became a believer right away. Talk to me about your involvement in this, because as I read the book, you're in neck deep.
Yeah, I'm in there quite a bit. So my involvement, much like most people in Nova Scotia, like I remember the where I was and who I was with and everything when it happened. I was actually out in Bayers Lake. I got a text from my wife saying, like, I don't know if you're following what's going on in the news, but there's like, they're looking for some guy who killed a bunch of people and he's on his way to Halifax. You should come home. And I'm like, oh my God. I start flipping through my phone, reading kind of the updates over the last few hours to see what was going on. Right from the beginning, I was just following every update, every little new tidbit of information. I had done a few episodes at nighttime covering the story early on, and it was mainly kind of recapping what was being publicly released by the police through their press conferences and whatnot. And I remember getting an email from a listener of my show being like, I heard this guy, Paul Palango, on the Rick Howe show, and he made a pretty compelling case that Gabriel Wortman was working for the police as an undercover officer. And I read that email. I'm like, this is crazy. There's no way that somebody managed to put that together. So I went online and Rick Howe archives all his old recordings. So I listened to the guy, Paul Palango, and I thought, I don't know. He sounds a little like your typical conspiracy theorist, but he tells a good story. So I thought I'll reach out to him. I'll have him on the show. We'll chat and come what may. So that's what happened. I invited him on the show. We talked, and much like you said, I was kind of at the end of it, like, he said a lot of stuff. We'll see what happens. 2 or 3 weeks later, just as new stuff started to come out, he got more and more accurate. And so I'd have him on again and again. And then all of a sudden I was like, Paul, like, your articles are amazing. The work you're doing is incredible. You have so much to say. And you're kind of at this point left writing it in Frank Magazine, which is behind a paywall, and not a lot of people across the country would read it. And then the Rick Howe show and the other outlets that he was mainly talking on, again, were local. And I was like, my show, a lot of people around the country listen. Let's kind of partner up and put it out there. And so very early on, we decided to do weekly recordings. We do them every Sunday night and live stream them on YouTube, on my YouTube channel. And we just call it weekly updates in the Nova Scotia mass casualty. And what we do is we just take what has happened over the past week, we break it down, and we share some of our own kind of research, thoughts, and insights. We've been doing that since the beginning, and man, it's been fruitful. A lot of tips and leads and new information came through us, through our show, listeners of the show contacting us who had insider access to different things. People who had been mentioned in the story or mentioned through the police that just have never come forward. By watching Paul and I online every Sunday night on YouTube, they maybe were comfortable enough for reaching out and talking to us. So I think we've managed to, shine a light at some different parts of the story that certainly weren't going to come up in a police press conference or anything like that.
Well, and I'm glad you did, because I know that, for the first time, well, maybe not necessarily for the first time, but certainly in a long time, people are going, okay, what we've been fed in the past isn't good enough. My humble prediction, is just going to be kind of akin to the Warren report that came out when the JFK assassination happened. A little bit of information, a whole lot of fluff, and then here's some recommendations that'll never be followed. That's my opinion. I don't know if you feel the same way.
Yeah, I think absolutely that's a thing. And it's what I'm realizing in watching this story play out and watching the public inquiry into this story happen is the special interest groups involved in the story are really dominating the narrative. So the police are heavily lawyered up. And by the police, I mean like the RCMP and their union are heavily lawyered up. And anything that's coming from them is very pro-police. There's a bit of spin on it. If it's anything damaging, the way it comes out is usually pretty creative in a way that it's, Friday afternoon, kind of some revealing information will come out. A lot of politicians are getting pie in their face in this story,
Yeah.
and even that is being controlled and how the public knows. But most of all, I think the biggest problem with this story is the public isn't as outraged as they should be, and I think the reason for that is the way the story is being told through the mainstream media and through the public inquiry is just this garbled mess that has no clear narrative. It's not being investigated or told in chronological order. So the average person who's not following it, day by day, it's just such a hornet's nest of weirdness that is hard to really understand. And I think that's what Paul and I try to clear up, is we try to take the big mess and just put it together in bite-sized, easy to understand pieces that when you listen to us, I think you probably quickly get on our side that, there's more to this story and the public is being hosed pretty hard.
I would agree with that. And, I guess, obviously, over 2 years ago. So it just seems like the way it played out just from the get-go, when they said it wasn't going to be an inquiry, it was going to be, something less, and and that there was that whole narrative, and then the fact that the justice minister used to work for the RC, like it was just the whole thing to me reeked of Nova Scotia politics.
Yeah,
I could think of Westray. I could think of certain politicians getting in trouble and saying a few nice things to the media, and all of a sudden they're senators and they're getting streets named after them, and just very disheartening. I was hoping that something more would come out of this. I don't think it's going to.
No, I think there's too much negotiation in how the story's told and what the truth is. What's going to end up happening at the end is, like, they're not going to get to the truth. They're going to get to the answer that satisfies the most people.
Right.
And that's like the direction it's going. Yeah, there'll be a report that will have a whole bunch of things that should change. The only one that'll probably be acted upon is whatever kind of outcome gives police more money. I think is what's likely going to happen. But yeah, it's not going to change. It's a losing battle. The public inquiry at this point, there's still another 6 months of it left. They've already spent well over what the inquiry into the September 11th terrorist attack spent. That was using $2001. They spent $16 million on that. The Nova Scotia public inquiry at this point is well over $25 million.
Incredible. And I think I read somewhere 70% of that was salaries and stuff for people that are working as part of the inquiry. So
I believe it, which kind of makes sense why they keep delaying the end result. So
sure, keep the paycheck going. And and again, that whole thing for me, and I enjoy, like, Paul will send me, here's the latest thing in Frank, and I'll read it, and it's like, please, like, you want more, and it's like that. That cliffhanger, but it's just incredible. It's incredible how he'll tell something, and then 2 or 3 weeks later, almost point to point to point to point, it's exactly what he said.
Yeah, but he's if you look at Paul's history and what he's done in his career, he's been reporting on the RCMP and writing books about the RCMP since I was a little kid. So he knows it. And when I talk to him about, how did you predict that, or what makes you think that, a lot of times he's going on his intuition and basing it on, just his prior experiences with them, and he knows what he's doing. He's been a great mentor, like in speaking to him every week, just as someone, I have no journalism background. I'm just like a guy with a curiosity and a microphone, basically. In talking to him, just it's like, in terms of music, it's just like hanging out with a musician who's on his way to retiring. He's been on the road for so long. He knows the industry inside out, and you're just starting. It's great to, kind of bunk up with them and just get some kind of life experience. But one thing Paul told me very early on that I always think about, and I'm like, man, he's so right. When we kind of decided to partner up, one thing he said is, like, we don't need to worry about breaking the story or uncovering the truth. All you need to do is tell the story. And if you're telling the story, people with parts of the story will come to you and have you tell them. And I was like, well, okay, let's just keep doing it then. So we kept doing our weekly episodes. But then what started happening is we were getting anonymous emails from people like, I'm a cop, I can't say anything, but, or people like, my son was killed in this. I don't want you to use my name, but here's the documents our lawyers gave us today. This sort of thing. And it's
Yeah.
like I started to realize, like, wow, we just need to stay on top of this, and we'll be leading the charge. And that's kind of what's happened at a lot of points. There's been ups and downs and pretty intense moments, but it's been definitely eye opening.
Well, and certainly there was what I thought was going to be a little sort of crack in the foundation when it seemed like everybody was doing this against each other with the police commissioner and and what have you, and it was promised this and political pressure, and then it just seemed to die out. It just seemed like there was a week of salaciousness, and all of a sudden we're not really hearing much about it right now.
And it's been that way from the beginning. I think the biggest revelation came very early on was the police were the RCMP was holding fast with their version of the story was that he went on a killing spree the evening of the 18th. He got out of Portapic at some point, and it wasn't until he started killing again the next morning, the 19th, and somebody came out of the woods, his girlfriend came out of the woods. It wasn't until that point that we learned who was doing it, and we learned that he had a cop car and was dressed as a cop. It wasn't until she came out the next morning. Something that happened very early on in this whole thing was Paul and Frank Magazine were given recordings of an insider gave them recordings of 911 call recordings in which you hear the very first 911 call about this. It's at 10 o'clock the evening of the 18th, and a woman calls just before she's murdered by him that happens on the 911 call, and you hear her say, "My neighbor just shot my husband. His name's Gabriel. He's a denturist. He's driving a cop car." He then kills her. Then you hear someone else call 911, and they say, like, "Yeah, I'm in Portapic and I'm outside a house that's on fire. I don't know if anyone called in about it." And the 911 operator is like, "Oh, what's the address?" And then you hear the guy on the phone. He's like, "Oh, wait, there's a cop here. He's in his cop car out in front of the house." And the 911 operator, you can hear her confused, like, "Oh, wait, the cops are already there." And then you hear the guy on the phone's like, "Oh, no, he's coming over to talk to me, I think." And then you kind of hear him like almost take the phone away from his face, and he's like, "Hey," and then all you hear is just like boom, and then you hear
Wow.
someone in the car with him like screaming like help. He lives from this, but he gets back on the phone and he's like, "It wasn't a cop, it was my neighbor Gabriel, he just shot me." And like when those calls were released, anyone who had been siding with the RCMP, if you heard those calls, you could there'd be nothing you could be except outrage, because they've clearly been lying up until that point. And that was, I think, when that happened was what made me really get on like Team Palango. And I was like, something's going on here. Whether Wortman was working with the police or the police are just doing everything they can to, for damage control, something's up. And as time went on, a million things have happened that made me see the light that how sketchy this whole thing is.
Well, and to me, I guess the downside of the sad part about it is, if it wasn't for yourself and Paul and you guys, and Frank, I just think this thing would play out. There'd be no opposition to what actually took place. We'd be fed a story of complete and utter garbage, and we'd take it and on to the next sort of deal. So I mean, good for you guys. I guess the question I'll ask you through the course of this and you kind of reporting on it and whatnot, have you had any weird things happen where people from the public have called you out, or I've got a friend who's a police officer that talks all the time, or somebody that he arrested in the past, he's got a code word with his wife. If he sees that person, she's supposed to have you had any weird stuff like that happen?
With this particular story, like related to Portapic, the only kind of weird thing I had was I got, somebody had wrote me, like 5 a.m, telling me, stop poking around, leave it alone. Don't look at this story. It's gonna, if you keep poking it up or poking in at it, you're gonna pay. And I was like, who the hell is this? And I expected it to just be a fake account and someone messing with me. But when I started clicking through their account, I'm like, this looks like it's an active Facebook account that isn't fake. So I took the name of the person who wrote me and I got in touch with Paul. We looked into it, and it turns out that this person was related to one of the victims of the story. And so anyway, I started to look into it, and that was kind of freaky. Like, I paraphrased the message they sent me, but it was a bit more threatening than I made it sound, I think. But I've come to learn that this person, I think, suffers a bit from mental health issues. But that was one thing that kind of freaked me out. And I guess that goes to say that not everyone is supportive of what Paul and I and Frank Magazine are doing. There are people, with any group of people, there's differing opinions, but among the families and the people affected by this, there are some that are very supportive and encouraging and have become friends, and there are others who would, I'm sure, be happy to just leave it to the lawyers and the RCMP and everyone else to just figure it out and see what happens when the dust settles. But that's been challenging. I don't know if it's been challenging. I guess I understand it. Different people will react in different ways, but I guess that'd be about it. The whole, you've probably, I don't know if you know about this, but the RCMP had been investigating leaks on the inside because stuff was being released through Frank, through magazine, through Paul, and through my show, that they wanted to know where all this stuff was coming from. I believe the RCMP likely expected it to be an inside leak, maybe an officer or something, and they passed the investigation into these leaks to the OPP. That has been kind of weird. I've been always waiting. Like every time I see a cop car near my house, I'm like, oh shit, here we go. But
that's where I was going with that. Yes.
Yeah, it hasn't happened yet, but I don't think they would know better. I think because if they did come to my door, the first thing that would have happened is I'd have my phone out videoing it. Like, let's do this. But I don't think they would ever bother Paul or Frank, probably for the same reasons. They are likely trying to figure out, who amongst them disagrees with what the force is doing.
That's mighty interesting, and that's real. I didn't. So Paul and I have only ever chatted on Messenger, but I was thinking about that because as I'm reading the book, and a great reference in there when you guys first, I think it was when you first met, and he said it was at the Ardmore Tea Room on Quinpool Road, which is where a lot of business goes down.
Yeah.
People don't realize that.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm running out of time here, Jordan, but if people want to find you, and I absolutely love what you're doing, it's right up my alley. There's so many different things that you have on there. It's not kind of a one-trick pony. Mm-hmm. Where are my viewers, my listeners going to find you, where you're doing, what you're doing?
Well, the best place is just my website, which is nighttimepodcast.com. I'm live on my YouTube channel with Paul Palango every Sunday night at 9:15 Atlantic time. And anywhere you get podcasts, search for Nighttime Podcast, and you'll see 7-8 years of episodes waiting for you.
It's a lot of information. It's a lot of cool stuff. And you know what? It's pretty cool. Like I was rifling through it there when you and I first made contact, and I kind of feel like I'm big on the like the ghost hunter shows and all that stuff, and I kind of feel like now we're having our own little version of that with what you're doing, and it's very cool. So that's off to you, my friend.
Awesome. Thank you.
Well, that's another episode of this, and thanks so much, Jordan. We got to stay in touch, my friend, and I'm definitely gonna be tuning into what you guys are bringing up. So
awesome, man.